Today I'm going to tell you in story form how to bring more hummingbirds to your patio, deck, or wherever you're feeding them. Understanding how they think could end up having you have thousands like me. Do you really want
Hi,
thousands?
it's Robbie from Southern California. Today we're going to sit outside. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to talk about how to open a restaurant, how you could bring a lot of people in, or how you're going to keep them from not coming in. I want you to think about this and visualize this as we go on with this story. And then I'll tell you why we're doing this. So I'm going to open up a restaurant. And I'm thinking, well, I don't have a lot of money or a lot of space, and it's kind of small. So I'm going to start with one table, just a small table, and I'll put some folding chairs around. So I'm going to let everybody sit around this little table. It's cute. It's a cute table. It's got a hummingbird on it. And the people can come in and have a cup of coffee. It's going to be really a coffee shop, and they'll be able to enjoy themselves there. So when I first get it open and I'm opening the doors, it says open. And I've got coffee now. I'm serving kind of, I guess it's an okay coffee. So I finally get somebody come in and they look good and I'm really happy, they look happy in there. And they sit down at the table and they start with their coffee. But then I notice when I'm looking around, I'm looking out, kind of peeking out the window, and I see somebody walk by and they look in the window and they see coffee and they look at the sign. Price is really good. It's almost cheap, like free. And then they look around and then they keep going. This just keeps happening. I don't understand. I mean, I've got a table, I've got coffee so cheap, nickel a cup. Can't get any cheaper than that. And yet people are coming, looking in the window, and they're leaving. Oh well, so I've got this person sitting there having coffee, and then they're done. They leave. All right. Well, I think maybe the next day will be better. So the next day, I have this big guy come in and looks a little rough around the edges. Almost somebody that if you were walking across the street, and you saw this guy coming, you turn around and walk back. One of those things. But I'm thinking, okay, he gave me his nickel and he bought the coffee and he sat down at the table. And then I see a really pretty young girl walk by and she looks in, and it's like she looks in her purse and that's all she's got is a nickel, and my coffee's a nickel. But she kind of looks in the window and then she saw me and she shook her head and she left. This kind of went on all day. As people were walking by, as this guy sat there at that one little table and had coffee, but everybody else just kept walking by. But then this young guy came by, kind of a short little guy, really rough. And he kind of walked in, he said, "I'll take a coffee." I said, "All right." And he takes a coffee for a nickel. Now I got 2 customers, I'm so excited. Goes over to the table and he shoves the guy that's been sitting there all day. Tells him, "Get out. I want this table and you're done." They kind of started fighting. I didn't know what to do. What in the world do you do if these 2 guys are fighting and it's just me there? Nobody else is there except, me, and I don't know, the police are not going to come that quick if you call, not here. And, well, the fighting got so bad that eventually the big guy left. And the little guy stood there. And now I got this little guy with a table at the one table sitting on a chair, and I got 4 other chairs sitting there. Nobody's in there. But at least I sold 2 cups of coffee today. Oh, by the way, his name was Rufus. The other guy, maybe his name wasn't that good. Maybe he had too feminine of a name. His name was Anna when he came in. Anna's. But Rufus got table to himself now. It's his table and nobody's coming, because anybody that kind of came over and started to sit down, somebody else came in and they said, "Can we sit here?" He said no. I thought, what am I going to do? He tells him no. And so everybody else left. So all day Rufus sat there. A couple times he got up and he left, and somebody'd come over and I gave him, the coffee, and they bought it for a nickel, and they sat down. He came up, told them to leave, kind of pushed their stuff over, and they left. They took their coffee and left. So that really wasn't going to work out. After a few days of this, I realized I can't keep a coffee shop open if I'm selling 1 cup here and there, and then maybe the next day 2 cups. That's not going to work. So I decided to invest my money and get a couple more tables. So I put another table right next to that one. Kind of the same thing. Anna's came in the morning, that big burly guy, and he sat down at the other table. And then later on, Rufus came, that little short guy that's really rough. And he sat down at the other table. And then he decided he didn't want Anna's there, and he started a fight. And before you knew it, Anna said, I don't want this. And he left. And now Rufus had 2 tables. They were sitting kind of next to each other, the tables. Oh boy, here goes more money trying to figure out what to do with this restaurant. So nobody else was coming in, and we're just not having any business in here. And I'm running the whole thing by myself. So what I decided to do is get a couple more tables, and I spread them apart. And things improved a little bit. I noticed after a few days, I had Anna's come back, and he sat at a table, and then Rufus sat further down, so there wasn't too much fighting. Kind of threw some nasty glares at poor Anna's. I mean, that guy's a big guy. He could really knock the living daylights out of Rufus, but he's not really a fighter, which is good. So it wasn't all that great, but I was now making at least 25 cents a day. I'd have occasionally some, different people come in, sit down, and after Rufus started up with them, they would leave. Oh boy. So I decided, I talked to Gary. I said, look, I know you're working, but I need to get this coffee shop going. Goodness, I'm only charging a nickel a cup. So he said, all right. He came over, he walked in, and we looked around, and he said, well, how about partitions? That might work. So now we set up partitions, like booths, and now I had my table set up separate. That really helped. At least I had like 4 or 5 people come in now at a time, and they would take a separate table, and they can't see each other because of the partition. And they would come in, have their coffee, eat, or I should say, drink and be merry. They might buy a donut or something that I had there, but it worked out better that they didn't see each other. I think we're on a roll now. We're getting something going. So now Anna's can come in and get a table, and Rufus can't see Anna's, so they're not fighting anymore. And then I had that young girl come back, and she sat at another table. And so now things were getting better. In fact, she came back the next day, that young girl, with a couple of her friends. And they were sitting at her table with her. Rufus doesn't seem to have any friends. He's always by himself. But Anna's doesn't mind too many, other people around. He brought in a friend too. So a couple of them were sitting. So now my restaurant's getting a little more fuller. I should say my coffee shop. I'm really pleased with that. But they all started to mingle. And I managed to keep the coffee shop open for about 6 months. So Rufus had his own spot, and he couldn't see anybody when he was sitting and sipping his coffee. And then Anna's had his own spot, but he was bringing in a few of his friends. And then the young girl came in, and she was bringing her friends. And then some other people came in, and they were bringing theirs. And then what happened after about 6 months, I noticed they started to all talk to each other. They actually had a meeting one day, and a whole bunch of them came in, and now I had like 20 people in my coffee shop, all sitting around, shooting the breeze, and mingling and having fun, in the coffee shop. So I'm thinking this is getting really good. The partitions help, because when people wanted privacy, they had privacy. Rufus, that little twerp that thinks he owns the place, he couldn't even see. He'd have to get up and go walk over to another booth and see who was sitting there. And he's too lazy for that. All he wants to know is he's guarding his own table. And at least things started to calm down, and things got better I got more tables. I didn't have to put as many partitions around because as long as I had enough tables, forget Rufus. Rufus has kind of got his own thing going, but the Annas, and all of them coming in, having their own tables and seats to sit, it got to the point where I have 20 or 30 people come in and sit down next to each other and they talk a little bit and everything was great. I did have a problem one day. Rufus has a brother, Rufus 2. And Rufus came in and all the tables were full and he wanted a table and then he went over to someplace else and knocked everybody out, and now he had Rufus, the original one, and Rufus 2 sitting at their own table. And so that kind of cut business down that day because that table stayed empty except for Rufus 2. So that was an issue. But, all in all, everybody's starting to get along. So I figured I'd get some more tables there. And this way I would have a lot more people coming in, and they're starting to, bring books. They're reading books. They seem to all be getting along. They're telling stories. They're talking about TV shows they've seen. And they almost made it like a community. Like, they weren't the best of friends, but when they were at the coffee shop, they started to talk to one another. So things were working out really good. I noticed that as long as I kept up with what was going on in the coffee shop, and I really had to stay focused on that if the tables got full, I had to have Gary come and get some more tables or benches in there. So if somebody else came in, they'd have someplace to sit. You never wanted to have no seats available because that is when the chaos starts. Now, I hope you're coming along with me on this and analyzing what I'm saying. We had Rufus, we had Anna's, and then that young girl that walked by that wouldn't come in. What I'm actually talking about is not a coffee shop. And you probably already realized that because of where I'm sitting. I'm talking about hummingbirds. The way they think, the way they're motivated to feed, just in general, the way they are as birds. The point is, Rufus, that type of hummingbird, and the Ellens, but mainly the Rufus, they can be tough and they want a feeder all to themselves. Because what they're doing is they're protecting it. They think it's a flower and they don't know that it's not going to run out. Well, it could run out, but I can refill it. But in their mind, they think it's going to, could run out, and they want to protect that flower so they have food all day. If you notice sometimes with your feeders, you may have a Rufus protecting a feeder, but as the sun goes down, what starts to happen is he knows that flower is going to die for the night and a new flower will open, and he starts to kind of back off on his fighting usually and let the other birds come in because they're at the end of the day, the end of the life of the flower, and he'll find a new one in the morning. Remember, a hummingbird feeder is nothing more really than a very full nectar flower. The restaurant that I'm trying to get you to understand is you need to have space. Now, I don't need to have partitions, and I have a video on how I made partitions to bring the birds in. But now, over all these years, the birds have figured out that when they come in, there's always food. If they fly in here and they see food and they know that they have a seat, they have someplace they can go, they don't get that urge to quarrel and fight and scare everybody off. They will, Zoe, they will, she's barking at a lizard. They will if they thought they wouldn't get enough food. It's kind of like standing at a buffet restaurant in line. I've talked about this before. And you know that they only have a certain amount of food, and by the time the line gets to you, they tell you, sorry, there's no food, and you have to go home after standing in line for an hour. You would be devastated. So if somebody cut in front, you got a family in front, and they bring in their 15 friends come, and they cut in front of you, and you see somebody else down the line, they wave on a couple more friends, and before you know it, you got 100 people in front of you that weren't there, Well, that's what happens with the hummingbirds. They look at all of the birds around them as competition for food. Remember, food is so important and so hard for them to get because the amount they have to eat all day, that they try to protect their flower. So here we've created an environment for the birds where they feel safe enough to know that if they come in and some of the feeders are empty, they know other ones have food. And they know, because they're trained, and this is by trial and error, that they can come in maybe in another 15 minutes and there'll be more food, more things will be filled. If your birds are secure, and the security is there's enough food for them, then you will lower the rate of fighting. There's always going to be some quarreling because there's certain birds like rufous hummingbirds here, and your other birds back east, your ruby-throateds are really rough too. They have to get to know the birds that there's enough food, and that will mean separating feeders, which I've got feeders down there and feeders down there and feeders all over here. They have to know if they can't get to their favorite feeder for whatever reason, they can go to their second favorite or their third favorite or their fourth or their fifth or their sixth. The whole idea is there's someplace else for them to go. And if they can be guaranteed that in their brains, that they know that they are going to get food no matter what before the sun goes down, you can diminish a lot of that quarreling and fighting. The more feeders you have out, the more you will have happier birds. Even here, I mean, if you go back a few years ago, you'll see, 6 years ago it was one feeder. Then I had a hummingbird come build a nest on the feeder. That was fun for a couple years. So I had to add a second feeder and still do hers until the babies opened their eyes. And then I didn't want to touch them anymore. She was angry, but I didn't want to take any chances because she knew me, but the babies didn't. So I had to be very careful with that. But I added in more feeders until now I've got dozens and dozens of feeders. If you can create an environment where they know there's more food than they need, you will have happier customers, less quarreling, and all in all, more of a peaceful situation between both male hummingbirds and female hummingbirds. You're going to see some come in, some will try to drive the others off, but here's the thing. One hummingbird cannot fight 50 birds at one time. He can't do it. He physically cannot do it. It's impossible. So if he comes in and there's 10 birds at that feeder, he can't chase them off. He may try to chase off one or two, but eventually, in a matter of moments, he realizes, okay, I've got to go find a different feeder to feed at because it's not going to work. Think of your hummingbirds like people. Think about how you would feel if you were standing in line and they ran out of food before you got there. That's why they make reservations at a lot of restaurants, so they have so much food, and that's the way it is. Buffets can be kind of rough because they can run out. I haven't been to a buffet in years, but the point is, you have control over your birds. That's just the bottom line. I have control over how the environment's going to be here. Adding in plants, adding in flowers. We'll talk about that because that's a whole different subject. Today we're talking about food, nectar, fighting. That's what we're talking about. Not even how to make the nectar because that's another video. Making sure that when somebody comes in, whether it's my coffee shop to make sure there's a seat for them to sit at, and if they want privacy, they can have privacy. Any of these they can go down there. Or they can mix in and mingle and squeeze into a seat that's available. You have control over your environment. Birds will quarrel, but that's okay. It's part of nature for them. What you don't want is to end up with one bird that has complete control over your feeders. Now here, it's getting very busy because the sun's going to go down within 2 hours. So they're getting stressed, not stressed out, but they're getting to the point where they want to make sure they have enough food. So I'm going to wrap this up. We can talk about a lot more. I want you to put your comments in there on things that you're having issues with, and maybe we can sit down and have a conversation. We can put it into a story where you can visualize going to a coffee shop, having one table there with 4 seats. You don't want to sit with somebody in general that you don't know, especially, some people, I mean, there might be somebody you just don't like the looks of them or you don't feel comfortable. A lot of times it's okay. And even here, it's okay. But you've got to give them choices. I want to have a choice when I walk into a coffee shop where I can sit, where I'm going to sit if I'm going to stay in the restaurant. You've got to give your hummingbirds around here choices as to where they feel comfortable. Eventually, when they get to know you and get to know the environment you've created, they'll feel more and more comfortable. But it is an environment that we're building. We're building it with flowers, we're building it with hummingbird feeders, we're building it with shelter, we're building it with good food. There's a lot of things we have to do, but the first thing we want to do is think about seating. Think about enough space. Maybe think about you want everyone to feel welcome and you have room for everyone and anyone. And if you can get that mindset in with your hummingbird feeders, I think you're going to have a whole lot more happy hummingbirds and a whole lot more happiness coming from you as you look out and see thousands of hummingbirds coming down, demanding food that you have to put out all day when the sun is up. So with that, have a wonderful day. Don't forget to eat what you grow and tell me if you got anything out of this. I'm curious. And well, anyways, as I was saying, I'm going to go check all these feeders. There's food in a lot of them, but a lot of them are starting to empty, and the birds are coming in for their late night snack before they go into a torpid state for tomorrow. And I have to make sure that every hummingbird that comes in, whether it's 100 birds, whether it's 1,000 birds, everybody's got to have a seat. And when they do come in, they're not coming in to sit here for an hour. They only come in for minutes, if that, to get a drink, and they may not come back again until tomorrow. But generally, we have found out that they come in every 15 minutes if they're locals and they're in the area. Keep that in mind, and I think you can take some of these off my hands. With that, have a wonderful day, and don't forget to eat what you grow. Boy, do I wish I could grow sugar, but nope, I can't, because the only sugar they could eat is white granulated table sugar, which is sucrose, and that's 1/4 cup of white granulated sugar with 1 cup of water, and you've got it made. And we'll talk more about making hummingbird food in another video. Bye-bye. Wonder if they pooped on my hat.